Welcome to the fifth annual, not annual, but fifth Mosquito Illness Alliance Conference. Thank you to everyone who is attending today, whether in person or on the call. I think currently we have about 15 people on the call, and that number is growing. Our speaker today is Mrs. Judi Anderson from the DEET Education Program. Her talk today is on the topic of avoiding vector-borne diseases. We will have a question and answer session towards the end. Thanks again for joining us, and I'm now turning it over to Mrs. Judi Anderson.
Thanks so much, and thanks to everybody who's here today, either in person or with us on the phone or the webinar. This is not advancing. This is finicky, isn't it?
Always.
Why we're glad you're here. Our organization is a stewardship program that's funded by the people who make active ingredients in insect repellents and the people who formulate those ingredients into repellents that are used by people all over the world. We're going to discuss vectors and diseases, not just West Nile virus, because I think it's important that you know some other things that are going on. We're going to talk about repellents, but many other things that are preventative as well, who's at risk and where you're at risk, and some special concerns. Vector-borne diseases are diseases that are transmitted to people by insects, ticks, fleas, flies, whatever. They're most commonly associated with ticks and mosquitoes. We'll discuss some of the more important ones and where they are. And all of these diseases are named for the location where they were found, and the pathogens that the vectors carry are named for the scientists who found them. So here are a few of the important mosquito-borne diseases. West Nile, of course, you all know about. But there is Eastern equine encephalitis, and this is where it's commonly found. These are rare, but they cause brain inflammation. St. Louis encephalitis, also rare, but they had it in the sewer systems in Las Vegas last summer, and they had 3 people who caught it in California last summer. This one runs in 15-year cycles, which is pretty common with vector-borne diseases. There's always a cycle. Sometimes the cycles deviate, but not by much. Lacrosse encephalitis is something that affects children. It kills about 100 little kids a year. You can see where it's spread across the country. It was first found in La Crosse, Wisconsin, hence the name. Now, while Zika gets all the headlines, even still, more people are at risk for West Nile virus in the U.S. Most of the cases, as you all know, go unreported. The illnesses are frequently seen from July until early frost, but in warmer climates, they can start cropping up earlier. In California this year, they had a West Nile virus person diagnosed in April, which for them is most unusual. And in recent years, California has been a hot spot for West Nile. As you know, the mosquitoes that carry this virus are active from dusk till dawn. And West Nile isn't just for seniors. Our friend Amanda, who's joined us here today, is a young adult who has West Nile. But there have also been cases in infants, toddlers, and other young children with some deaths. Here's where West Nile is. Now, the gray states of West Virginia, Virginia, and North Carolina report differently than the others, but they have West Nile in those states as well. And Maine and New Hampshire, Hawaii, and Alaska do not have it yet. Here's where the serious cases were reported in 2016. You can see when I mentioned before that California carried a heavy burden, you can see a lot going on in California and a lot from the Dakotas down to Texas. Now, all of you who are present today, either in person or on the phone, don't need to be told about the statistics on West Nile and the symptoms. 80% of people have no symptoms, lucky them. 20% get what's called a mild case. We were just discussing that before we went live here. Lyle Peterson, who is the head of the CDC's Vector-Borne Disease Division, an MD, at the age of 39 in 2005, contracted West Nile virus going out to his mailbox one evening when he said, like all of us, I thought I was just going to run out to get the mail. He got what's known as a mild case of West Nile. He became our poster child. But he said there's absolutely nothing mild about even the mild case of West Nile. He was a marathon runner. He couldn't even begin, he could barely walk for 6 months. So all of you know these bad symptoms and many worse ones. And the worst ones are the darker side of West Nile virus, where you have all sorts of things going on which render your lives turned upside down. And for that, we're truly sorry. There's no treatment other than supportive treatment, as you all know, and the mortality rate is pretty high for those who don't recover enough to go to treatment. Now, there are some misconceptions about mosquitoes, and I thought it was important to share some of these with you because as we talk to people around the country, we hear a lot of interesting things. Some people will say, well, I didn't use repellent, or I'm not about to use repellent because I don't think very many mosquitoes are infected. And we had that conversation with a group just as this group here, with some people in Colorado in 2005 who caught West Nile virus, and they were astonished because they thought 1 in 10,000 mosquitoes was infected. It was 1 in 10. And they said if they'd known that, they A, wouldn't have gone outside, or certainly wouldn't have done so without a chem suit on, and certainly would not have gone out without repellent. Some people think all mosquitoes bite. No, it's only the females. That's the same for ticks too. The males are helpful as pollinators. All mosquitoes prefer to bite other mammals before they bite people. Well, that's true for some mosquitoes, but for the one that carries Zika, they'd rather chew on a person than any other thing they can imagine. One of the rumors is mosquitoes aren't out during the day, so I don't have to worry. Not true. There are mosquitoes that are out during the day, and the Zika one is a day biter. It's rarely out at night. Other people say, I'm not near woods or stagnant water, so I don't need to worry about mosquitoes. Not true. And the reason is because you don't have to be near woods or stagnant water. Their behaviors will tell you something more about them. The West Nile virus mosquitoes, as I mentioned, are active dusk to dawn. They will travel several miles from where they hatched. They prefer birds and other mammals to humans, but the Zika carriers are what I call stealth carriers. I'm talking about Zika because it's entirely possible that some of you on the phone live in areas where Zika might be a possibility, or where there are already the mosquitoes but don't have the Zika virus. And because some of you who are presently with us today may at some point in time see the Aedes aegypti mosquito, which is the carrier here in Mississippi. These are stealth biters. You won't know you're being bitten. They're cosmopolitan. They live around people and their homes. They actually live in homes in drains that don't get drained frequently, or in pots where the water flows under your plants. They can live for a long time in an environment that's not air conditioned. They only fly about 500 feet from where they came out of a container of water. They can breed in as little as a bottle cap of water. So if you have a bottle cap in your yard, you could conceivably have these mosquitoes breeding in your yard, and they won't go more than 500 feet, and they're looking for someone to chew on. They are very aggressive people biters. And they will bite through clothing. So if you're wearing very thin clothing like ladies tend to wear in the summer, you can do a little spray of repellent on the clothing as long as it's not rayon, and that will help. These mosquitoes are different from other mosquitoes. They take multiple meals from a bunch of different people rather than just from one person before they go off to lay their eggs. And in doing so, if they're infected with anything, and they can be co-infected with yellow fever, dengue, and chikungunya, which are 3 very nasty pathogens that you don't want, So they can spread all of those pretty dramatically. They like to bite knees, calves, ankles, and feet. So that's why the CDC is constantly saying, wear long clothing, wear socks if you can, do something to cover up your feet. You won't know you're being bitten because they have a mechanism for anesthetizing the bite site. And I mentioned they can breathe in a very small amount of water and can be co-infected. Here's where people in the United States live that currently have symptomatic cases of Zika. These are people who typically got it by traveling, although a few of them got it a couple of other ways. But you can see the darker states are the one with the most people. And there are a lot of people with Zika in this country. Now, here's where the mosquitoes are that are capable of carrying Zika. The one in the blue is called the Aedes aegypti, and it's the one that is what's known as a competent carrier. It means it's a very good vector. It gets the virus and it infects people. The Aedes albopictus has a much wider range. As you can see, it reaches up past Chicago and up into New England. It can carry the virus, but it's not a very good vector in terms of conveying it to people. So what happens when you superimpose the Aedes aegypti map on the map of the people in the US who actually have Zika now, and if a mosquito bit them, they could infect the mosquito. And here's how it looks, that gray shadow from San Francisco up into Missouri, all the way up to New Jersey and the tip of Pennsylvania. So we have people, we have mosquitoes. Happily, we don't have much in the way of outbreaks. Zika is what the mosquito professionals call a game changer. It's the first mosquito-borne illness that causes reproductive issues. As you've probably heard, it causes terrible birth defects. And it's also the first mosquito-borne disease to be sexually transmitted. So we used to say, avoid mosquito habitats, and that would work if you could stay out of the woods so you wouldn't get West Nile or other things. But as I mentioned before, Zika lived in and around people. It was found last summer in the parking lot of the San Diego Chargers Stadium. It's in drains of houses. It lays eggs in houseplants. Its eggs can lay dormant for a long period of time, and once they get wet again, then the mosquitoes will crop up again. They're very durable mosquitoes. Like West Nile, 80% of the people who get this do not have any symptoms. And then there are all those so-called mild symptoms, which are probably not so mild. It's found in blood, urine, tears, semen, vaginal secretions, and saliva. And there are reports, though they're not very well verified, they're simply reports or suggestions of things that need to be looked at, that they can cause neurological issues, heart issues, something called Guillain-Barré syndrome, which is a neurological issue in older adults, and as I mentioned, birth defects. So who's at risk? Anybody who travels outside the US to any country south of the border or into the Caribbean, it's everywhere. Those people who live in areas of the U.S. where Zika has been found in the mosquitoes, and that is in Texas and Florida. Those who have sex with somebody who has Zika, and babies whose mothers contract Zika when they're pregnant. And it appears, there's the suggestion that the first trimester of pregnancy puts those babies at worse risk for this particular virus. But the jury is still out on lingering effects for those children who, at least at birth, don't appear to have any effects from it. The CDC's advice is use repellent. Men who travel to areas where there is Zika, who could have been exposed or who have it, should not have sex for 6 months or should use condoms. Good luck with that. Women should abstain from sex or use barrier contraceptives for 8 weeks, or avoid pregnancy in other ways and avoid infecting their sexual partners. and women should consult a healthcare professional before becoming pregnant. Now, none of us at my age group or your age group is even remotely going to be thinking about getting pregnant, but you all have family members who may be of childbearing age, either children or grandchildren. And I want you to be sure to convey this message to them, especially if they're traveling. This is a very dangerous virus. And so that advocacy effort applies to people who have church groups that go on missionary trips to Honduras or wherever, school trips to areas where this mosquito may be present, family travel, spring break down to the Caribbean, and part of migrant families who go home to visit their families in the countries south of the border. So abstinence is probably unlikely, so people are going to have to be very careful. And exchanging bodily fluids, there's some discussion about tears and things like that and sweat. I'm not sure that there's a lot verified associated with that, but there's certainly the suggestion, and I know some people are studying it. So athletic teams could be at risk. There are two emerging mosquito-borne viruses that we don't know very much about just yet, and they are rare. One is Jamestown Canyon. 68% of the people who get it get a neuroinvasive disease, similar, I'm going to say, to West Nile, in that that's neuroinvasive, but it may have other characteristics. And in the news yesterday, it was announced that there's a new one in Florida called Keystone virus. It apparently is pervasive in animals and mosquitoes throughout Florida. It's related to La Crosse encephalitis. We need to know more. They only have one case in a human being, but now it's on the radar screen, so they may find more now that they know it's there. So that's mosquitoes and the things you need to worry about and where you need to worry about them. Let's talk about ticks, because ticks are a whole different kettle of fish. These are 4 of the ticks that cause the most tick-borne disease, and I'll talk about these in a minute. But worldwide, there are almost 900 species of ticks, and there are 90 species in the U.S. An American dog tick, which you've all probably gotten off a dog or off of yourself at some point in time, is capable of transmitting pathogens to her daughters for 6 generations, and an expert at one of the universities where I live said that would give you 15 quintillion infected female ticks. I have no clue how many zeros that is. It's probably 15 because quintine, but if even only 10% of those lived, that's a huge number of infected ticks. Other ticks can also pass pathogens to their progeny in that way. Ticks are related to spiders. They have 8 legs. They lived in the age of dinosaurs. They can go 2 years without a blood meal. They can survive cold winters, but they can't survive dry environments. So if you have air conditioning in your house, the ticks that get in your house on your dog, or God forbid on you, are probably not going to live very long. Ticks do not fall from trees. Ticks are on knee-high vegetation. So you can walk on a path, but stay away from vegetation. This little chart shows you the life stages of ticks. And what's really important about the top one, which is the deer tick that transmits Lyme disease and a bunch of other stuff. You see the little one with the red and the blue dot? That means that that's been known to feed on people, and it's been known to transmit disease. And look how tiny it is compared to the dime. It's not as big as the N on the one that's spelled out on the dime. So what you're looking for is something very small most of the time. And these nymphs, as they're called, are typically out early in the spring. The nymphs are about the size of a poppy seed. The CDC did a news release a couple of weeks ago with poppy seed muffins with ticks on it. People freaked out, so the CDC freaked out. They apologized profusely, took that away, but nonetheless, they made the point. If you see freckles that move, be concerned. You have to, if you're outside in areas where there are ticks, you need to do what's known as tick checks and shower, because showering will wash the ticks off your body if they haven't attached. You need to remove the ticks as soon as possible, because the longer they are attached to you, the greater the risk of disease transmission. We'll talk about that in a minute. When you come inside and you know you've been in tick territory, take all your clothes off in front of the dryer, all of them, shoes and all, throw it in the dryer. because the ticks will not survive in the dryer. Even though you might wash them in the washing machine, they'll survive that, but not the dryer. So that putting them in the dryer is the way to get them off your clothes and not bring them in your house. Tick-borne infections vary geographically. I'll show you some of that. They occur year-round in some areas where it's warm, like Mississippi or where I live. In Minnesota, that's not likely to happen, but when those hungry ones come out of the snow in the springtime, usually around the 4th of July when the snow melts in Minnesota, then they're really hungry. They carry a variety of pathogens, bacteria, viruses, protozoa, and some unknowns. They can be co-infected, so you can have one bite and get several different diseases, God forbid. And several different tick species can carry the same diseases. So these are a really dangerous critter to be around. And I share this with all of you because those of you who have already been through West Nile do not want to be bitten by a tick. This would not be a good thing. And those of you who are caregivers for West Nile individuals don't want to be bitten by a tick. Now this chart is hard to see here, but it illustrates the different ticks that can carry multiple diseases. So the American dog tick carries 2. The black-legged tick, which is the deer tick, can carry 5. The Lone Star tick, which is an aggressive tick for humans, carries 5. Now these are just that we know of and can verify. The important diseases that they carry, some of them are virtually unpronounceable. Anaplasmosis, babesiosis are co-infected usually with deer ticks and Lyme disease. Ehrlichiosis is a very nasty disease that causes death if you don't treat it with an antibiotic in time, and it can really be nasty. Powassan comes from Canada. Rocky Mountain spotted fever you've probably heard of, and tularemia. Now, those are all potentially fatal ones. Rarely fatal are Lyme disease, Master's disease, also called Southern Tick-Associated Rash Illness, which you have here, alpha-gal meat allergy, we'll talk about that in a minute, and relapsing fever, which is caused by soft ticks. So this is a tick that is the Gulf Coast tick. It's expanding its range, and it carries a rickettsial bacteria that is related to what causes Rocky Mountain spotted fever. This is the brown dog tick. It causes Rocky Mountain spotted fever and caused an epidemic in some Indian reservations in Arizona a couple of years ago, where it took residents in the homes in between the studs of the house. And so the CDC had to come in, rip off the walls, eradicate the ticks, treat all the dogs in the community. It's a mess, but this is a dangerous tick, and it killed several children there. The American dog tick carries Rocky Mountain spotted fever and tularemia. Here's where it's found. Huge distribution across the country. Rocky Mountain spotted fever gives a number of nasty symptoms. It can be fatal. If you don't treat by day 5, they're usually dead by day 8, according to the person at the CDC who is responsible for this disease. Doxycycline, which is an antibiotic, is the first line of treatment. Here's where you will find cases of Rocky Mountain spotted fever having occurred. Before antibiotics, over 80% of the infections were fatal. This is what it looks like in the late stage, hence its name, spotted fever. The doctors have told me that by the time it gets to this point, things are pretty dire. So you don't want to wait. If you think you've been bitten by a tick and you start having flu-like symptoms and it isn't flu season, get yourself to an infectious disease person. The Lone Star tick, so named for the little dot on the back, causes something called alpha-gal, carries ehrlichiosis. Heartland is a new viral disease discovered in Missouri, carries Southern Tick-Associated Rash Illness, and tularemia. This guy is a nasty tick. It loves to bite people. The alpha-gal is a tick allergy or a bite allergy related to red meat allergies. You can no longer eat meat. You'll go out to dinner. 6 hours later, you'll be in the hospital in an anaphylactic shock situation, and they'll be going, what in the world happened to this person? Well, you will not be able to eat meat for a very long time. Sometimes it resolves. This is also caused by the dog tick, but it's more commonly associated with the Lone Star tick, and it's reported in the US, Europe, and Australia. The incidence is unknown. I hear more about it with all the medical meetings that I go to. More people start talking about that, but it's likely underdiagnosed. Ehrlichiosis is a bacterial disease. I was doing grand rounds with doctors in a Kansas City hospital a couple of years ago. They said, "Too bad you weren't here 2 weeks ago." Why is that? We had a girl 17 years old who showed up here. She had flu-like symptoms. We said, "You have the summer flu. Go home. You'll be fine." 3 days later, she came back and died in their arms of ehrlichiosis. All they had to do was shoot her with doxycycline, and she probably would have been fine. So this is a very dangerous disease. And I urge you, if you find a tick and you start feeling bad, please get medical help and tell them that you think you had a tick bite. Star eye, as it's called, is also Master's disease carried by the Lone Star tick. It throws a bullseye rash just like Lyme disease and has some Lyme-like symptoms, but the pathogen is not the Lyme spirochete. Nobody knows what it is yet. Here's where it is in terms of the Lone Star tick's range and where it can occur. So a lot of people who think they have Lyme disease really don't, especially if they live in Missouri over to Virginia border and south. Tularemia is found in wild animals, and it occurs in hunters who kill rabbits and things like that and then handle the carcass or eat the carcass. Sometimes it's caused by inhalation of dust around the carcass, very nasty disease. It's carried by 4 different ticks and by deer flies. This is one of my strange ones. There is a soft tick. All these other ticks are hard ticks. There's a soft tick that lives in a fairly diverse region from, I'll show you a map in a minute, from Texas over to California. These things live in mountain cabins where during the winter where there are no people there, they chew on the rodents that also live in the cabins. And in the summer, the people come and sleep in the cabins. And these ticks behave like bed bugs. They come out, they anesthetize the bite, they take a blood meal, and they disappear. And what happens to the people who get bitten is that they have a high fever for 3 days and then it goes away. And a couple days later it comes back and then it goes away. And this is called relapsing fever because it comes and goes over time. So somebody figures it out and gives them an antibiotic. So here's where that occurs. You can see it's mostly in the western states. Lyme disease. It's the most commonly reported vector-borne disease in the U.S. You can see that virtually all of it is concentrated in New England, across the Midwestern states, up into Minnesota. You will see dots on this map in other locations. It's questionable whether the people were in New England and got it and then went home to Florida, or whether they had a bullseye rash that was not really Lyme disease, but something else, like star eye. This is what it looks like. Powassan is carried by the deer tick. Its infection is different from all other ticks in that it can infect you in 15 to 30 minutes. All the others are 24 to 36 hours. So here, if you are in Powassan area, I'll show you a map momentarily, you have to be totally vigilant. It's very rare, and the experts don't know yet whether or not the pathogen has been there a long time and they've just never had it on their radar screen, or whether there really is more. But 10% of the people who get it die, and many have lasting adverse events, just as you do with West Nile. Here are the places where Powassan has occurred. You notice Minnesota, Wisconsin, New York State are carrying the burden of it right now, and they're finding more of it every day. Tick behaviors differ a little bit. The Lone Star ticks and the deer ticks, where Lyme disease is prevalent, are very aggressive. The deer ticks in Missouri, Virginia South, are docile creatures. They live under a rock. They prefer to eat something else rather than you. They also feed on lizards, and it's thought that that interrupts the cycle because normally for Lyme disease there has to be a white-footed mouse in the cycle someplace that causes the virus to increase in the environment. So if they're not chewing on the mouse, the total incidence of Lyme disease is decreased in that area. Some experts think that there's something in the lizard's blood that removes the spirochete from the tick if the tick is infected. So my retirement plan is to sell lizards to Connecticut and other parts of New England, because that sounds like something we ought to be looking into. Removing ticks. Always pull straight up, don't twist. The tick cannot release itself no matter what you do. Its biology says it's cemented in place until it gets a full blood meal. So you can't use matches or nail polish or Dawn soap or any other thing that my mother did to me and probably you and your mothers did to you. Who knows? That won't work. You have to just pull it out because it can't back out. Protection is typically the only thing that we can do for all of these vector-borne diseases, whether it's ticks or mosquitoes, because in some cases, when it's viral, there is nothing that can be done, just as in West Nile virus, other than palliative treatment. And you can protect your environment as well as yourself. You can remove standing water around your house. You've heard that before. For ticks, you can modify your landscaping in order to keep them away from your yard. Most tick bites that are identified by people occur at home. They're not out in the woods. Now, what repellent to use for ticks? You can apply permethrin, which is an insecticide to clothing, or purchase clothing that has permethrin embedded in it, and that kills ticks and mosquitoes on contact. Or you can use a 20% or higher EPA-registered product for longer-lasting protection from ticks if you're using a repellent. As I mentioned before, there are no vaccines. The diseases with ticks are transmitted in minutes in some cases with powassan. If you're bitten by a tick and you do not have symptoms, you do not need antibiotics. If you are symptomatic, very prompt treatment is crucial. Remember that children, for your grandchildren, can present different symptoms than adults do. The bacterial infections respond to doxycycline, and some of the tick-borne infections can be quickly fatal, like ehrlichiosis or Rocky Mountain spotted fever. The red circle is where the EPA registration number is on products that have been tested for safety and efficacy. And I don't care what repellent you use, as long as it has an EPA registration number on it. It's crucial because we know that they work. These come in different forms. Some are easy to carry for travel, like towelettes. You have pump sprays. I have a candidate here. When you apply, we'll talk about that later, a towelette makes it much easier because it's like a little towelette that you get for cleaning your face or your hands. Concentration is the amount of active ingredient in the product that's circled on this drawing, as you can see. The higher the concentration, the longer the period of time you'll be protected from a bite from ticks. It's a little more for mosquitoes than it is for ticks. Traveling abroad or anywhere where you think you might have trouble finding repellents, take it along. It's not always easy to find. The directions are always the same for repellent products. Follow the directions. Protection time varies by your gender, your metabolism, where you are, the species, lots of variables. Repellents don't kill, permethrin does. The active ingredients are DEET. It's been around since 1948. There are 500 different products registered. It can be used on children as young as 2 months of age in concentrations up to 30%. This is the recommendation from the American Academy of Pediatrics. It's been in place for 15 years. It's very important because you need a minimum 20% product to repel ticks. The other actives are picaridin. Lots of people like that. There are 40 products. IR 3535, which is in the Skin So Soft repellent product. There's another product called oil of lemon eucalyptus. It's a derivative of the oil that's actually in eucalyptus. It's produced in a chemical plant, but it works wonderfully. Children have to be 3 years old in order to use that one. Other actives are catnip oil and oil of citronella. These are products that are not widely available and they're not registered for very many things. Now, applying is important. See the guys on the left who are spraying each other? That's the last thing in the world you want to do with a repellent. The lady on the right is doing it correctly by aiming it at the child's leg. And the whole idea is you must use repellent on your exposed skin. And you probably should be using it the same way you would use a sunscreen, by smoothing it on. You can either spray it on your exposed skin and then rub it smoothly on, or you can put it on your hands and do it that way. The hand method is what is recommended for little kids, so for your grandkids. There's no need to apply beneath clothing unless the ticks can get underneath your clothing or the mosquitoes can bite through them. And rayon, plastic, and leather do not like DEET. You can pick a product with a lower concentration depending on the time you're going to be outside. So 5 to 10% for being out for a few minutes for a barbecue. Light spray on clothing will work. For sunscreen, put the sunscreen on first, apply the repellent second after the sunscreen has absorbed. The reason for that is when you combine them at the same time, you get burned and bitten because they negate one another. As I mentioned, if you're traveling, always take it with you. Always follow the label directions. Protection times will vary. Here are some of the times. This is for DEET. For 100% product, you get 12 hours. There's a product called Ultrathon, which is sustained release, that gives you 12 hours, and it's 34%. Great product. It's what our military uses. A 30% product will give you 8 hours or so. This one right here is at 25%. It'll give you 6, and so on. At about 50%, the efficacy level's off. Eye stinging is the most commonly reported adverse event. If your grandkids have it on their fingers and they touch their eyes, it will sting. Just splash them in the face and they'll be fine. Very rarely people get a skin irritation. It's thought that it could be the fragrance in the product. These are typically people who are allergic to cosmetics or other things that make their skin break out. So they can try a little bit of a non-scented, non-fragranced product on the inside of the wrist. There are urban legends around DEET. DEET causes seizures. It's more dangerous at higher concentrations. None of these are true. It doesn't cause seizures. We have studies to show this that go back over billions of uses. Higher concentrations are more dangerous. No, there's no relationship between the adverse events and concentration. Children are at greater risk. Not true. Causes death. If you drink enough of it, yes. It's disgustingly terrible to taste. So, but if you drink enough, it can be a bad thing. And the directions may look scary. All the directions for DEET, picaridin, and all the other repellents have exactly the same directions. The reality is that DEET's the most widely used active ingredient of all the consumer products that we buy every day, not just repellents. It's been around since 1948 with billions of uses. The EPA studies show that it doesn't cause anything bad like cancer, birth defects, or genetic changes. The EPA has no age limitations on any of the actives except oil of lemon eucalyptus, which is 3 years. And as I mentioned before, the CDC and the American Academy of Pediatrics say little kids 2 months and older can use the other repellents other than oil of lemon eucalyptus. These repellents are also recommended for pregnant women and nursing mothers who are in areas where West Nile virus is endemic or in areas where you have Zika or other things that could happen to them. Now, what do experts say? I'm going to read you a short quote from, of all places, the Environmental Working Group. I don't know if you're familiar with them. They are an anti-chemical advocacy group that is very vocal and very powerful, and they said DEET has a long record of safe use. It's widely used but much maligned. The safety profile is better than many people assume. Effectiveness is approached by only a few other repellent ingredients. It's not the perfect choice, not the only choice, but weighted against the consequences of Lyme disease, and as you all well know, West Nile virus, it's a reasonable one. So I think that's a pretty stellar thing for them to have said. Take-home messages: use a 20% or higher concentration on exposed skin and clothing for longer protection from ticks and from the mosquitoes that carry Zika. Use permethrin only on clothing. Dress appropriately when you're outside. Avoid endemic areas if you can. If you travel, take and use repellents. So, are there questions?
I have one question. Just the logistics of applying the repellent. Let's say a tick lands on your ankle, and you have the repellent on. Does that mean the tick's going to jump off, or does it mean that the tick's just going to go up or down into the foot or up the leg until it encounters an area that doesn't have repellent? What exactly happens to the tick when you put D to prevent it from biting?
Since we have Wendy here and she's an entomologist, I think she should answer that question.
Because I'm sitting here thinking, I hope that doesn't come to me. I'm not certain. I'm going to be honest with you.
Okay.
I would think it repels them, period. I would think it doesn't even crawl up at all.
One of the things I've noticed in just picking up ticks and having pets is that they often migrate to areas where, for example, the intersection between hair and skin, and in the groin area. I mean, it's not like a tick, jumped up and ended up on the groin area. So I imagine they have to, do a little bit of traveling, and maybe they're a little bit more selective than we think they are about where they have their sit down for a nice meal.
For those of you who couldn't hear any of that interchange, the question was, if you're wearing a repellent and a tick gets on the area where there is repellent, does it jump off of your body, or does it move to a part of your body that doesn't have repellent? I asked an entomologist to answer the question, and she said she didn't know. I don't know for sure either. I think it might depend on how aggressive the ticks are, and they vary in their aggression based on what kind of a tick they are. What I can do is go find out the answer from a couple of guys I know who specialize in doing nothing but ticks, and I can tell you when they go out to find ticks, they look like they're going on a moonshot. They tuck their dungarees into combat boots and then use duct tape where the top of the boots are so that there's no way the ticks can get underneath their clothing and climb up the inside of their trousers. Ticks are really aggressive, and they just are interesting. Some people who study ticks indicate that if you have the repellent on your clothing and it's an even spray, and you don't need much on your clothing, just a light spray, that they will get off your clothing. And I have seen that happen, but I'm afraid I can't even begin to give you any definitive answer as to other scenarios. You have something to say, Wendy?
No, it's not. I'm just agreeing with you.
Okay, Wendy's agreeing with me. She's the entomologist, so I'm lucky for today.
Judy, we have a question from the chat room. It's from William Alford, and he said during his West Nile blood work, it was discovered that he had antibodies for RMSF, which is Rocky Mountain Spotted Fever. He said, yet I never knew of the infection. So he had antibodies, never knew when the infection occurred. And his question is there a mild case that isn't so dangerous? He says his titer was very high.
I think you have to answer that, Dr. Wolf. Let me repeat the question. One of the people who is on the webinar with us had his blood tested, and they found high titers of Rocky Mountain Spotted Fever in his blood when they did the testing, and he was never aware that he had it.
I'm Dr. Lace. I'm not sure I can answer that question, but when a pathogen, whether it's rickettsia or a virus, enters the human body, literally there is a battle that ensues. And you have your innate immune system that's trying to prevent that particular intruder from gaining hold. With West Nile virus, it's directed at the central nervous system. With ticks, I'm not even sure where the rickettsia like to go to. But this battle, when it does ensue, and it wins, when your immune system does win, what's left over is exactly what Mr. Alford or Dr. Alford described. he was tested for West Nile, and they found high titers of Rocky Mountain spotted fever antibodies in his blood, and that tells me that his immune system triumphed. And so that's not at all what in fact, that's what I would predict is still going to happen in a lot of cases with these other pathogens, not just viruses, but also bacteria. Even in the bad epidemics, the worst, like smallpox, there were always some survivors. George Washington, for example, had smallpox, and he was a survivor. And so if you checked his blood, you would see the antibodies, but he didn't. He was one of the survivors. And so, yeah, in that case, I would say that his immune system triumphed over the invader.
Another question from the chat room.
Hang on, because I need to add something to that. One of the challenges for the tick-borne diseases, and presumably all diseases, but this I happen to know for tick-borne diseases, is diagnostic tests for people who come in for treatment from a tick-borne disease are frequently not accurate until at least 45 days after the onset of symptoms. In many instances, I'm informed, the presence of something in your bloodstream from an earlier infection, maybe something that you got as a kid, is not all that uncommon. And early on, it's very hard to sort out what it is you have. So the advice that the medical professionals typically give to people in emergency room situations is you should give a person doxycycline if you suspect they have a tick-borne disease. You don't have to prove that they have it. And if the symptoms improve dramatically very quickly, then you know you have the correct diagnosis. And if they don't, then you keep on trying to determine what the correct diagnosis might be. Hope that helps.
The chat room question was, are you aware of any products that contain sunscreen and insect repellent in one?
The question is, are there any products that are combination sunscreen and repellent? They used to make such a product, and it was formulated in a way that it did not have this negating effect on one another. It was a great product. The FDA, however, saw it from the perspective of potential misuse by consumers because it was supposed to be used as a repellent, not a sunscreen. If you think about the directions for use for a sunscreen, it's use sunscreen all the time, lather it on, repeat applications, go crazy with sunscreen. And they were concerned that this product would be overused so that you would be getting more repellent on your skin than they would want you to have over a given time frame. So they said that those products should be taken from the market. They did not remove them from the market. They allowed to go through the normal chains of distribution. So you'll still go to Walmart and some other locations where you find sunscreen and you find repellent and you'll find a combination product and you go, aha, here's a new product. Actually, it's an old product because they were not made after 2015. So great idea, but the FDA didn't think the American consumer was capable of sorting it out. So they took it off in an abundance of caution.
There's no more questions.
Okay. No more questions? Yes, ma'am, Susan.
I take doxycycline as a maintenance for skin for recession. Would that give me any preventive benefits?
I'm not a physician. You're going to have to ask the one sitting next to you. The question was, I take doxycycline, and is that effective as a preventative action in my case?
The answer is yes.
The answer is yes.
But with a big habit, that shouldn't encourage people to be taking doxycycline or any other antibiotic improperly. We have probably a tremendously important problem, and that is the resistance that develops to antibiotics when they're given to patients too freely. And so one of my pet peeves is actually using antibiotics to try to treat viral infections. That doesn't work. And what happens is that over time, we the body's bacterial systems. You have infections that actually develop a resistance to the antibiotic, and so it's a major problem right now, right, in all emergency rooms across the world. So don't be taking, or don't convince your doctor to take prophylactic stuff.
The answer is don't convince your doctor to take doxycycline as a prophylactic measure. Part of the problem is antibiotic resistance, which occurs over time. That's a big problem in emergency rooms, and physicians, I think now, this is my opinion, probably are very sensitive to this. So I hope it works to prevent any tick-borne disease that you have while you're trying to cure your other issues. But you might go and get a blood test, and you probably find you have 4 tick-borne diseases in your blood that you didn't even know were there because you were asymptomatic. It's not uncommon to be asymptomatic. Nothing else? Thank you very much for your time and your attention today. I hope this was useful information to all of you, and I want you to have a really safe, bite-free summer so that you can continue on the road to wellness. Yes, sir?
I was in Bass Grove yesterday, just walking around, getting a little exercise, and I noticed they had a tick remover. It's a little metal, like a little, almost like a credit card, but it's got a teardrop cut out in it.
Yes.
And you slip it over the head of the tick down to the small end, raise up on it, supposed to remove the head and all.
Yeah, it does. There's also one called Tick Ease, which we give away to medical professionals when we engage with them at various venues. It's made of surgical steel, so they can use it in their practice, and they can sterilize it easily, and that works also. Yeah, but the one you're talking about works absolutely fine. The word is that if you pull the tick out and you don't get the head out, it's not the end of the universe, because most of the pathogens are still in the tick's body. When you remove the tick, you can put it in a small container of alcohol or even hand sanitizer, and that'll kill it. Don't throw it down the toilet, or God forbid, don't throw it out in the yard. And never touch the tick with your hands. They are full of pathogens. They're such fun things.
You have one other question.
Yes.
What time frame between applying sunscreen and repellent should there be? Should you wait 5 minutes, 30 minutes?
When you apply sunscreen, the question was, what's the time frame between applying sunscreen and repellent? You want to give the sunscreen an opportunity to absorb into your skin, and then you apply the repellent. So I guess it depends on the kind of sunscreen you're using, how long it takes to absorb. When you come in from swimming, you'll want to apply those again and go through that process again. Also with repellents will sweat off. So if you're a person who's outside and you perspire profusely, you might want to think about getting a product that is sweat resistant so you don't have to reapply often. Otherwise, reapply. Again, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to be here. Sharon has just handed me a note to ask that I speak to you about the event last night. We went to a ball game here in Jackson. I don't know who the team played, but the Jackson team whooped them 10-2. It's pretty. Pardon?
The jumbo shrimp.
The jumbo shrimp from where?
Jacksonville.
Jacksonville. Okay. We gave away containers of repellent to people who came by the table. Sharon had set up a table. There were lots of us there. And Sharon's table was most interesting because she included on it things that don't work as well as things that do work. And the people were asked to play a game. They were given a stack of cards that on the back of the card had an item that would or might not work against mosquitoes and or ticks. So one would be, for example, a picaridin-based repellent, which would work, and one would be one of these wacky devices that you hang in your yard and you hope the mosquito will fly into it. We had a great time. People were mesmerized by all of this. Sharon's ability to teach people about the things that they should and shouldn't use is unparalleled. And I think the people who spent time with us willingly did so. I mean, we didn't tie them down, but we did corral a few, if I remember correctly. They were most grateful for the information. All of you, having heard what I've said here today, I hope will go forward and share with your families and your neighbors and friends and colleagues whatever you remember about today in terms of protecting against vector-borne diseases, because it's so important. You all, of all people, have the power of telling a story. People don't believe it when I say West Nile virus is terrible. When you say West Nile virus is terrible, they listen. So use that bully platform that you have and be an example and a communicator for all of us, because we're really counting on you to prevent this from happening to somebody else. Truly.
Okay, any questions in the room, even for Dr. Lane or Judi or myself? Can you put the stuff in the road after that? How often do you have to replace it? Josh, you want to talk about that? The water side?
The water side?